welcome back to RCC Let's Talk. I'm Kaitlyn, one of the school guidance counsellors, and today I'm again joined by Malcolm, one of our school teachers.
Yeah, good morning everybody.
If you're in high school, chances are you've heard the phrase, you need to study more. But here's the thing, studying longer doesn't always mean that you're studying better. In fact, a lot of the common ways students study, like rereading notes, highlighting everything, or cramming the night before a test, feel productive, but they are some of the least effective ways to learn. The good news is there are a few strategies that can make studying more effective, less frustrating, and sometimes even faster. So today I want to talk you through 3 study techniques and how they can make your study sessions work better for you. Tip number 1. Test yourself instead of just rereading. One of the most powerful ways to learn something is actually trying to retrieve it from memory. Retrieving information or active recall during study sessions improves long-term memory by strengthening neural pathways and forcing the brain to reconsolidate memories, making information easier to access later, simply like during a test or a written exam. Unlike passive reading, which creates a false sense of familiarity, active retrieval challenges the brain to reconstruct pathways to stored knowledge. So instead of repeatedly reading your notes, you stop and ask yourself, what do I remember about this topic? Would I be able to explain this topic without looking at my notes? Or could I answer a question about this? Some of the strategies you might use for this could be flashcards, practicing questions with mates or parents or your teachers if they're willing to do that as well, covering your notes and summarising that from memory, or explaining the topic out loud. Why does this work? Because every time you pull information out of your brain, you strengthen the neural pathway connected to that memory. Think of it like walking through a grassy field. The first time you walk across it, there's barely a path. But if you walk the same route again and again and again, a clear path forms. The same thing happens when you retrieve information from your memory. And here's something really important. If you try to recall something and struggle, that's actually pretty good for learning. That effort is what strengthens the memory. Instead of asking yourself, did I read this? A better question might be, could I explain this without looking?
Yeah, Kaitlyn, I'd like to add in there that one of the things we try to get the kids to do when it comes to sort of sitting things in long-term memory is revisiting a topic.
Yeah.
So revisiting a topic, next week, next month, etc. So having multiple looks over a topic helps to embed that into their long-term memory as well, particularly for our senior students who are studying for things like external exams. It's very critical that they take multiple looks over everything that they do. Yeah,
perfect. And I think it's important too, like throughout the term, you'll be building on each topic that you learn and building each week. So to help strengthen the foundation of that knowledge, going back and revisiting the content that you might have done in week 2 or week 3 in week 6 or 7 is a really good way to refresh that memory.
And it solidifies it because it is a build-up over time. And we even do that in the classroom. So often at the beginning of a lesson, we might put some questions up that look at what we did in the last lesson just to do that little bit of solidification of what we did.
Yeah, perfect. So tip number 2, another strategy is studying in structured intervals rather than long interrupted sessions. So we're looking at about 25 to 30 minutes of focused study followed by a 10-minute break and then repeating this cycle for, whatever works for you. So why does this work? By breaking study sessions down into manageable 25-minute to 35-minute intervals, followed by short breaks, the technique prevents cognitive fatigue and uses the brain's natural cycle to strengthen neural pathways. So after about 25 to 30 minutes of deep concentration, our cognitive efficiency starts to drop. And this is when you start to notice things like rereading the same sentence, getting distracted more easily, zoning out, or feeling mentally tired or drained. These short breaks then allow our brain to reset attention and reduce cognitive fatigue. But also the breaks do something else that's really important for learning. They facilitate memory consolidation. So the short, regular breaks are not idle time. They allow your brain to process and move the information from short-term working memory into the long-term storage, which is where you'll retrieve that information later, like during an exam or an assessment. So this helps the brain process and consolidate the information that you've just learned. So even though it might feel like you're not learning during the break, your brain is actually helping organize and store the information for you to access later. And this is why structured study sessions often lead to better retention and less burnout than trying to study for hours and hours on end.
Yeah, and look, Kaitlyn, it's exactly how we run a classroom as well. You know, we have the students for 5 1-hour sessions a day, and sometimes doubles that are 2 hours long.
Yeah.
And we don't do big blocks of work in one hit. We try to break a lesson into short chunks and give them a change of what we're doing throughout a lesson, so it's not mentally fatiguing. Kaitlyn, when students do take a 10-minute break, do you have any tips for what they might do when they're on a break?
Oh, that's a good one. So definitely refueling. So having access to like quality snacks, whether that's like fruit, veggies, some carbs as well. So like your brain does use a lot of carbs when it's under mental load. So a good quality snack. Even communicating like with peers or family members, just to give yourself a bit of a break from that cognitive load of what study puts on the brain. It gives our brain a little break into something that's a little bit more natural and a little bit more easy. We don't want to be scrolling on social media or, accessing kind of that short, sharp hits of dopamine that we get from social media or
even else. Some gaming, for example.
Also gaming,
I know that was a little bit of a thing of mine. You know, going through university, I was a bit of a gamer, and I think those sorts of breaks tend to then distract you away and make your brain busy on other things. And you're not as keen to get back to the study that you need to be doing.
Definitely.
Maybe just like a little walk or a play with the dog, or something where you can pull yourself back into the study when you need to. Definitely.
Keeping that concentration on that. But you can use those at the end of a study session as a reward as well. So like if you do, say, 2 or 3 cycles of that 25 to 30 minutes and 10-minute break, so say we do an hour to an hour and a half of that, then using social media or gaming as a break at the end of your study session, as a reward at the end of your study session.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah. So tip number 3 is space out your study over time instead of cramming. And Malcolm touched on this a little bit when we spoke about our first tip. So this is simply reviewing information multiple times over several days or weeks rather than just trying to put everything into one long session. So we don't want to rely on cramming large amounts of content before a test. While this might be helpful in the short term, it won't be helpful in the long term. So we might recall a couple of things after a cramming session the next day during our exam, but we won't recall everything. Whereas spacing out our study sessions over time helps us remember a lot more of the content.
Yeah, look, I think students need to sort of recognise as well that they probably are going to cram. You know, if we've got a test the next day, you know, they will be lined up outside the exam room reading over notes. And that's fine because it kind of makes you feel a little bit better before you walk into an exam. You feel like you're ready. But it can't be the only thing you do.
Yes, yeah. And I think that's important too, is like pooling these all together as well as maybe a little cram sesh will be beneficial longer term as opposed to just doing one or the other. So why does the spacing out work? It's because every time you return to the material after a gap, your brain is then rebuilding that memory slightly. So we're pulling it from the long-term memory back into our short-term memory, using that information for however long we're doing this study session for, and then it's going back into that long-term memory. So similar to when we spoke about the grassy field, the more you pull it out and the more you walk that path, the stronger that connection is going to get in your brain and the easier it's going to be for you to recall when you need to.
Yeah, and last week we spoke about the stress that cramming creates as well. So spacing things out, I think, reduces that stress and helps again, solidify that information, helps that information go in rather than just get all jumbled up.
Yeah, absolutely. So this might look like, instead of studying for a 3-hour block the night before a test, you might do 30 minutes today, 30 minutes tomorrow, and then 30 minutes a few weeks later. So even though the total time of the study might be the same or slightly less, the spaced version usually leads to much better retention. So putting these strategies together, the really powerful thing is that these 3 strategies work even better when combined. So for example, a study session might look like 25 to 30 minutes of studying a topic. You close your notes and test yourself on what you remember. You take that 10-minute break, come back the next day, review the material again, trying to recall it from memory. And that approach uses, so you're then using the retrieval practice, the structured intervals, and the spaced learning all at the same time. Before we finish, there's one more thing that comes up almost every time I talk to students about studying, which is procrastination. A lot of people think procrastination means you're lazy or unmotivated, but that's not quite the whole story for a lot of students. Procrastination is usually an emotional regulation problem, not a time management problem. In simple terms, when a task feels uncomfortable, maybe it's overwhelming, boring, confusing, or stressful, your brain tries to protect you from that uncomfortable feeling. So instead of doing the task, you might suddenly feel the urge to clean your room, watch videos on YouTube or TikTok, check your phone, or start something that's easier. In that moment, avoiding the task reduces the uncomfortable feeling, which makes your brain more likely to repeat the same behaviour next time. But the problem is that the work doesn't go away and it just builds up and creates even more stress later. So how do we break that cycle? One strategy we can use is something called lowering the starting barrier. So instead of telling yourself, I need to study for 2 whole hours, I need to do all of my homework tonight, I need to get this done right now, we can try telling ourselves, I'll just start for 10 minutes, or I'll just do 1 question of my homework. Starting is often the hardest part. And once your brain begins the task, the discomfort usually drops and it becomes easier to keep going. Another helpful strategy is breaking the work into smaller steps. So for example, instead of writing on your to-do list, study maths, your first step might be open Google Classroom, read the page of notes that you wrote the day before or in class, answer 2 practice questions. Small steps make the task feel more manageable, which reduces the urge to avoid it. And this connects back to the study strategies we talked about earlier. Structured study intervals also help reduce procrastination because the task suddenly has a clear endpoint, and your brain is much more willing to start something that has a definite finish line. So if you ever catch yourself procrastinating, remember, it's not a sign that you can't do the work. It's usually just your brain trying to avoid discomfort. And the best way past it, it's just a start.
I'd like to say, Kaitlyn, that we all procrastinate.
Yeah.
And we do. Even as teachers, we look at a big pile of marking and we procrastinate and go, there's 28 students there that we have to read, and we procrastinate there. Yeah. And the tips of, what you've just given in terms of starting small, I love that, and if you combine that with the idea of, taking breaks and having small sessions and rewarding yourself. I know in my brain, I'll just do 5 now and then, go and grab a drink or something to eat, and then I'll come back and do another 5. And, all of a sudden you're all the way through 28 students of marking. And so they are just fantastic tips for students. Sometimes we just need to get started.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's easy to say that you need to do all of this work, but there's no reward or benefit in being the first person to complete all of this work in the shortest amount of time. So doing what works for you and your brain is going to be much more beneficial.
Absolutely.
For you. So our next important reminder, there's been a few this podcast, is using better study strategies doesn't mean studying becomes effortless. Learning new information, unfortunately, still takes effort. But these methods make sure that the effort actually turns into stronger memory and understanding rather than time just spent staring at notes.
I think that's we could almost coin the term study smarter, not harder.
Yes, absolutely.
I think that's what it kind of all comes down to today, study smarter.
That's it. And it's still going to take effort, but let's make sure our effort is resulting in something that's going to be beneficial for us.
Absolutely.
So some final thoughts. If you remember just 3 things from today's episode, let them be these. Test yourself instead of just rereading. Study in focused intervals with breaks. And spread your study across multiple days. Studying smarter doesn't mean doing less work. It means doing the kind of work that actually helps your brain learn. So thank you for listening, and I hope these strategies make your next study session a little more effective and maybe even a little less stressful.
Less stress sounds fantastic. Thank you, everybody.